Hello again with another tool in our Agile modeling toolbox. This time we'll go over uh, what we call communication diagram. Communication diagram is kind of a mix. We're taking the entities that we identified in the domain model, bring in more of the flow or actions that we kind of identified in the system sequence diagram and the activity diagram. So it's an interaction, getting close into more of the software design. So we will end up with more what looks like classes start interacting and identify what is it these public functions in these classes that you need to build as we go. Again, we start with the system operation, which is what comes from the system sequence diagram. And we have a video for that as well. So I try to keep the video short, so I'm doing these snippets versus big one. Maybe we end up compiling something that's big later, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. I just trying to keep this as natural, give you a feeling of how this happens actually when we do this with teams. So communication diagram, we start with a system operation, and in this case, the system operation was confirm withdrawal. So confirm withdraw cache. And this will go in an entity. And this one is usually system operation is going into the system that we're building. So this will be an ETM. And think of this as a very M, maybe. And this is the ATM machine. So this is a variable name. The M is a variable name, and this is a type or the entity. And this is mostly coming from the domain model we did. Some of the things in the domain model will not map directly one-to-one to an object. You break down on some of them would be just a concept. It does not map to, as you go down toward the detailed software design, some of these will just disappear. I mean, it's just a concept, but it's maybe part of another entity in a software term. So we start here. This is going through that. And the first thing that happened with this would be one. I would do is enough funds. And that was from the activity diagram. The first thing was is enough funds as a decision. So this will be, and maybe the decision of this will be in the account, and I call it A, and it's of type account. And the reason we do this variable is that later on you can refer to it. So is funds, and this would be A, the account, and maybe the user or something. So this is the reason we do the A's. And then the account will go, so you get this, it goes back as yes, you can draw the back or not. There is it's implicit that you have a return for this call. So this is one. And two, execute transaction. If you remember how we broke this down, the activity diagram into two, we end up with execute transactions, and it will be execute transaction. And this, I would say, go to transaction object. And again, ATM, account, transaction, these are entities that appeared in our domain discussion. And this is a variable name just in case I need to do that. From the activities diagram, we broke this down. This was broken to two steps. One of them is update balance. The first one was update balance, and the update balance will be in the account maybe. So I will do that, and this is 2.1. So to do this, a sub step into a 2.1 will be update balance. And of course you do an A and maybe amount. And this amount would be here. So you would have account and amount. So this flow in a fund amount. So you can see the flow of the parameters or the data as well. So that's the second thing when we did execute transaction was to log the transaction itself. So maybe I would do that, or maybe I would have, just to do this, to introduce the concept to 2.2, I would log the transaction. Maybe we decide, no, we are introducing another entity that says transaction manager. And this will go to it. So transaction manager will be 2.2 here. I'm not calling this back. Or maybe that will be the transaction manager here. And we call this maybe a TM. And we go back to do the 2.2 here, which is log transaction, and maybe you have a trans ID and something. We discussed in the activities diagram, should we have generate or put something into a receipt? So let's say that will be a 2.3 generate receipt. And I would assume that this is receipt manager. Similar, this was not exactly in the domain. We talked about receipt as an entity. We did not talk about receipt manager. This is again, something may appear as you go into details. You discover more terms, you need to identify it. You agree on it as a team, and this is a term. When I say receipt manager, we know what that means, and we go update our domain with it. Communication diagram is one of those that's you're really designing the object. So this is an object. This object, transaction manager, will have an endpoint, a public function that's called exec transaction, and maybe this will take account, you have amount, and this gets you back more of a, it returns an ID, and this is for this here to use. And you start breaking this down as you go. So this is an object, will have a public function that's with this signature. You're kind of designing the object and the contract between these objects. Well, this will be an object, and this object will have a function that's called generate receipt, and will maybe take a transaction, an amount, whatever the information we need here. And this goes into the discussion as we go. This was communication diagram, again minimal notation, boxes and arrows, with some numbering to get the breakdown steps into smaller. Pretty much if I look at this function in this object, it will have something to update account, which is a function in this account object, and the second one will be logging it, the third one will calling this. So I know objects, publics, and I do the sequence of this. So I kind of have an idea how this function inside it will look like. And you can have an earlier discussion of this is too much dependency, how we decouple this. We will do I will do a few videos around solid principles and the grasp principle as far as the design, and this kind of these concepts help you here, because now I see this function is calling 3 and touching 3 objects. This object transaction manager has 2 dependencies now, and is it okay? If I want to unit test this, I need to mark 2 things. Maybe not. 2 is okay, not a big deal, but that's, you keep that in mind. So so you see that this, we designed the code into the object and the interaction point between these objects, and this will bring up some ideas before we write code. And you do this for not every system operation. You select what is worth it to do this. And this, again, living document. You take another system diagram, create its own flow. It brings us more concepts that need to be added to the domain. Maybe it comes back here, we need to clarify something. We just, as a team, we stand, do the board. We know what it knows. If I decide later to rename this, we rename it, and we know the history of it as well. Somebody new joined the team, get him introduced to the tool, how to read the diagram. He can spend time looking at the diagrams, and usually in the wall, low fidelity, nothing fancy, no Visio, no PowerPoint. It's meant to be low fidelity to encourage you to go right on it and change it. A more polished diagram would kind of push you back from changing it. Hopefully that kind of shows it's not an easy diagram to go through, but again, you take the activities from the user activities, the flow chart, and we start breaking it down. This came from the use for the system diagram. This one, these were the steps from the activities. You can figure out, come across, or need more steps here that was not in the activity diagram, which is good. You want to go back and update that, make it current, maybe not. As long as the team has that agreement on it. That's it for the communication diagram. Hopefully that was another agile modeling tool that will, you keep it handy. If you have any question, please reach out. Thanks again for your time. Hopefully that was worth your time. Again, intentionally, I do this low fidelity, more natural, as we do it with teams. With the stops, the discussion, this is how it feels. I do not really script this much. I picked an easy example just to see how that will go. We needed to change course a couple of times, and this is exactly why the modeling is that, why it's a low fidelity. It's our way of communication, collaborating, and discuss how we gonna design the system. Again, thanks again for your time, and we'll see you soon.